Welcome to Intermediate Algebra, Unit 2, Lesson 2, Solving Multiple Step Equations. Our lesson objectives are to solve equations with more than one operation required to isolate the variable, and to solve equations where we have to do some operations first to get like terms together or to distribute and then group like terms. So what is a multiple step equation? It's an equation that takes more than one process to isolate the value of the variable. So we're trying to isolate x just as we were before. So the variable has two operations done to it. If I look at the left side and I say let x equal 2, and I say evaluate the left side, you're going to multiply by 5, and you get 10, and then you're going to add 3. So you multiply by 5 and add 3, and you would get 13. In this case, 2 is not a solution because 13 is not equal to 18. But it's important to look at the order of those operations because we're going to do them backwards. We're going to start with undoing the adding of 3, which means we start by subtracting 3. And then to undo the fact that the x is multiplied by 5, we divide both sides by 5. And every operation we do to both sides. Okay, so here's our equation to solve again, and here's what I mean. When we put a number in for x, we multiplied by 5 first, and then we added 3. We're going to subtract 3 from both sides first, and then we are left with a simpler problem, 5x equals 15. You can now forget about the original problem, and this is why it's important to write your steps down, because now I'm solving 5x equals 15. I've done one step, and now I'm down to what's left is a single step equation. The 5 is multiplied by the x, so I divide to get the x alone. 5 over 5 reduces to a 1, and I'm left with x equals 3. So our next example is really similar, but negative numbers tend to confuse students. So what's done to the left side? Well, what's done to the left side, if I look at x, what's done to x is it's multiplied by negative 4, and then I add a negative 5. So this is steps for the order of operations. I'm going to undo them. To undo adding a negative 5, I subtract a negative 5. And when I subtract a negative 5, it's the same as adding 5. That will be the first step. And here I'm multiplying by negative 4. So then I will divide by negative 4. So that's shown on the next slide. So subtracting a negative 5, if I subtract negative 5, it's the same as adding 5, and that's what's shown here. When I do that, here's my new problem to solve. That's a lot simpler. I see the x is multiplied by a negative 4. So I divide by a negative 4, so these reduce to a 1, and I get 1x equals 17 over negative 4. So don't let that negative out in front confuse you. You have to disconnect operations from the x in the opposite order from you would do if I gave you a number for x and said find the value. So here's another one, and I know you see a fraction and you don't like me, but that's okay. You can get by this. You'll thank me for it later. So this time the x is on the right side, and it really doesn't matter We tend to put the x on the left side, but it just doesn't matter. So we're going to work with the right side and analyze what's being done to the x. So what's being done to the x is it's multiplied by 3/4. Or you could think of it as multiply by 3 and then divide by 4. I apologize for the handwriting. I hope it'll get better as these videos go on. So if you think of it this way, you can see there's two things to undo. You need to divide by 3 and multiply by 4 to undo each of these. That's the same as multiplying by 4/3, which is the same as dividing by 3/4. So you can look at it either way. A lot of you may have learned you just multiply by the reciprocal. That's the same as dividing by the fraction. But then after all of that, I see that I add a 2. So the last thing I would do if I were putting in a value for x and evaluating this right side is I would add 2. So the first thing I do to get x alone is I subtract 2 from both sides. It's done on the next slide. So here is the subtracting of 2 from both sides. -2 minus 2 gives me the -4. And I'm still, so now this is my new problem after I subtract 2 from both sides. So I need to disconnect the x from the 3 and from the 4. So the first thing I do is multiply both sides by 4 to undo the division. The order I do these two in doesn't really matter. So when I do that, I had to multiply by 4 over here. A positive times a negative is a negative. And I'm left with -16 equals 3x. Now I need to get 3 alone, so I divide by 3. Each time you do a step, write down the equation that's now left, because then that equation is always simpler than the one you started with. So x is -16/3. All right, this one is not set up as nicely. What I see on the left is I have two terms with an x. So I want to group like terms before I even start to solve. And you want to have all the terms with the variable on one side and any term that doesn't have the variable, and in this case there'll be numbers, on the other side. So my first step in grouping like terms, I take the 5x and the 6x and I get 11x. So this becomes my new equation to solve. This looks a little simpler. Okay, the x is multiplied by 11, then I subtract 12. So the first thing I do is undo the subtraction of 12. I add 12 to both sides. It leaves me with this simpler equation. 11x equals 44. X is multiplied by 11. I undo that by dividing by 11 because 11 divided by 11 will leave me with 1x. And I also have to divide the other side by 11, and that gives me a 4. Now this example looks, oh, I guess I don't have it done out separately. Here is the example, and this looks very much like the last problem. The difference is this 6x is on the other side. So we still need to group like terms, and the way you do that is you decide a side you want to keep the variable on, and on the other side you subtract any term with the variable. So I want to move all my x's over to the left. I could move them to the right, but I just chose left for now. So that means I have to make this plus 6x a 0. I want to zero that out on the right. So I subtract or add -6x to both sides. So I do that, and that leaves me with this equation to finish solving. I have x multiplied by a -1, and then I subtract 12. So I add 12 to both sides, and that gives me -x equals 44. Well, if the opposite of x is 44, then x has to be -44. Or you look at it like this. You divide x, -x is really x multiplied by a -1. So you divide both sides by -1, and it gives you x equals -44. Okay, and for our last example, we're going to need to distribute and get rid of the parentheses before I go to solve. So I need to take care of this first. So when I distribute, it's a -2 times x gives me a -2x. We all get that right. Watch the next one though. This -2 gets multiplied by a +4, and -2 times a +4 is -8, not +8. A negative distributed through parentheses will have the effect of changing the sign of every term. Both signs were positive in the parentheses. After I multiply, the terms associated with the terms inside the parentheses are now both negative. So I distribute, and now I have to group like terms. 3 minus 8. So you've got an 8 subtracted and a +3. That is a -5. That's where that comes from. And this is now my new equation to solve. I want letters on one side, numbers on the other. I want to zero out this -5, or it's like subtracting 5 when you add a -5. So I'm going to add 5 to make this become 0. So that leaves me with -2x, and on the other side I also had to add 5 to keep the balance. -2x equals 25. I divide both sides by -2 and find that x is -25/2. You can check your work by putting in -25/2 for x. You can go back to the original problem to do that. As a matter of fact, that's what I would suggest. That catches any mistakes you might have made in between. Okay, so now these are for you to try. Notice we have to group some like terms, and we have to do some distribution. So there's one of each type. And I put a fraction in there just to make sure you stop being afraid of them. Stop the video now and try these. The answers are on the next slide. They'll come up after you return to the video. All right, I assume you actually did stop the video and tried these. So here are the answers. If you had any difficulties with these, you should email me, ask me in class, get help in the tutoring center. After you should look at your own work first and try to find the mistake. And if you can't, you don't just let it rest. Let's find out why you didn't get it. Or it's always possible that I made a mistake. I think they're right, and I try my best to put out 100% correct information. But occasionally I didn't, and you would want to alert me to that. So don't just let that go if you don't get these. All right, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.